My name is Emily Hart, and before last October, I didn't believe in signs, ghosts, or second chances. I believed in plans, lists, and practical things, like coffee, deadlines, and paying bills on time. But then, one night, I woke up to the sound of something breathing outside my bedroom window, and that was the night everything changed. It was a Thursday, gray, heavy, and soaked with autumn rain. The kind of rain that doesn't just fall, but presses itself against the windows like it's trying to get in. I had moved back to my late father's farmhouse 3 weeks earlier, hoping the quiet would help me rebuild myself after my breakup, and after quitting the city job that had drained every piece of me. The farmhouse sat at the edge of Maple Hollow, a sleepy countryside town with more horses than people. I'd grown up there before running away to the city. Now I was back, 29 years old, sitting in a room that smelled faintly of cedar and dust, wondering when my life had started to feel so empty. I remember that night too clearly. I was lying in bed, unable to sleep, scrolling through old photos on my phone. My ex smiling at a cafe, my office desk buried in papers, my father's face, taken 2 months before the accident. Then, in the middle of that silence, came a sound. Tap. Tap. Like soft knocks on glass. At first I thought it was a tree branch brushing the window, but the farmhouse didn't have trees close enough for that. Then came a low, breathy noise, something between a sigh and a whimper. I froze. For a long moment I didn't breathe. Then, there it was again. A deep exhale, heavy, alive. I pulled the blanket tighter and sat up, staring into the dark. The rain shimmered against the window, distorting the world outside. I could barely make out shapes, but there, through the blur of water, I saw movement. Something large, something that shouldn't have been there. I stood, heart hammering, and walked slowly to the window. Lightning flickered across the field, and for half a second, I saw it, a horse, standing motionless in the downpour, right below my window. At first, I thought I was dreaming. A soaked, chestnut-colored horse, rain streaming down its neck, its dark eyes lifted toward me as if waiting for recognition. It was the kind of sight you don't forget, something both majestic and deeply unsettling. There were no farms nearby, no paddocks, no reason a horse should be standing there, alone, in the middle of a storm. I pressed my hand to the glass, whispering, "What in the world?" The horse didn't flinch, didn't move, just stood there, calm, patient, almost expectant. I grabbed my raincoat and flashlight before I could talk myself out of it. The storm wind pushed against the door as I stepped outside, instantly soaking my jeans. Gravel crunched beneath my boots. The flashlight beam found the horse's face. He was beautiful. Even through the rain, I could see the deep reddish-brown of his coat, matted with mud. His eyes caught the light and glimmered gold for a second, before blinking slowly, like he'd been waiting for me to arrive. "Hey there," I said softly. My voice trembled. "Where did you come from?" He didn't answer, of course, but he did take one cautious step forward, lowering his head just slightly. The air between us felt thick, like something unspoken passed through it. I'd never been afraid of horses. My father raised them. His whole life revolved around them. When I was little, I used to run barefoot through the stables, trailing behind a foal named Solace. He was the first horse I ever loved, but Solace was long gone. He'd vanished during a storm when I was 13, the same kind of night as this one. We searched for days but never found him. Now, watching this horse before me, muddy, lost, trembling slightly in the cold, I felt a strange ache deep in my chest. A memory, sharp and warm. He wasn't wearing a halter. No brand, no marks. Just a small scar above his left eye. An old one, healed but visible. I moved closer, letting him sniff my hand. His breath was hot and sweet, like wet hay. "Are you hungry?" I asked. "You must be freezing." There was no answer, only the sound of rain and the horse's steady breathing. I led him under the porch, away from the worst of the storm. He followed willingly, no rope, no force, just quiet trust. I ran inside and brought out a bucket of water and a few old carrots from the fridge. He drank slowly, keeping his eyes on me the entire time, like I was something familiar. And then, when I turned to go back in, I felt it. That tug in my chest again, a connection, an almost human sadness in his gaze. That night, I barely slept. Every few minutes, I'd glance out the window. The horse was still there, standing in the same spot beneath the porch light, staring up at my window as if guarding me. At 3:27 a.m., I whispered to myself, maybe he'll be gone by morning. But when dawn came, mist rising from the fields, the world gray and quiet, he was still there. I called the local animal shelter and told them what happened. "Found a horse outside your house?" The man on the phone repeated, skeptical. "Yes, he's been here all night." "Well, ma'am, we can send someone to check for a microchip." "What color did you say he was?" "Chestnut. With a scar above his left eye." A pause. Doesn't match any of the recent reports. "We'll send someone this afternoon." But when the truck arrived, 2 men in uniforms, carrying ropes and a trailer, the horse panicked. The moment they approached the yard, he whinnied sharply, reared up, and bolted through the open gate toward the woods behind the farmhouse. The men chased him for a few minutes, but returned shaking their heads. "Spooked one said. "Sorry, ma'am. If he comes back, call us again." I nodded, but part of me was relieved. I didn't want them to take him. That evening, as the sky bled into gold and violet, I stood by the window again. The yard looked empty, the porch light humming softly. I tried to tell myself it was just a lost animal, nothing more. But when I stepped outside to close the gate, I froze. There, in the mud, were fresh hoofprints, leading right back to the porch, and then I heard it, behind me. The sound of breathing, slow, calm, and close. I turned. He was back, standing a few feet away, his mane glistening in the fading light, eyes locked on mine like we shared a secret. "You came back," I whispered. He flicked his ears, took a step forward and lowered his head. Something about the way he moved, carefully, deliberately, made my throat tighten. Like he wasn't just an animal returning to food or shelter, like he had chosen me. That night, I stayed up writing in my journal, unable to shake the image of him. Why my house? Why my window? Was he lost? Or was there something else drawing him here? Around midnight, I heard a soft thud outside. When I looked, he was lying down near the porch, his body curled slightly, resting. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I whispered, "Good night, Solace." The name slipped out before I could stop it. My father's old horse, the one who vanished years ago. When I realized what I'd said, I froze. But the horse's ears twitched, like he recognized it. My breath caught. I didn't sleep at all after that. The next morning, fog rolled over the fields like a pale blanket. I made coffee, stepped outside, and found him waiting again, patient, gentle, still. He let me brush the mud from his coat, and for a moment, as my fingers traced the scar above his eye, I felt something impossible. Underneath the scar, the skin shaped into a faint pattern, a curve and 2 dots. My father used to joke that Solace had a smile mark above his eye, the same shape, my vision blurred. No, it couldn't be. Horses don't come back after 15 years, and yet when he turned his head, I saw something familiar in his gaze, a quiet knowing. He pressed his nose to my shoulder and exhaled deeply. Warm breath against my skin, reassuring, human. That was the moment I stopped pretending this was normal. Something was happening. Something I couldn't explain. Later that day, the neighbor, Mrs. Lawson, stopped by with a basket of bread. "Emily, I heard you had a horse show up out of nowhere last night," she said, smiling. "Yeah," I replied, "he's still here." Her smile faded. "Chestnut, scar above the left eye?" I nodded slowly. Her expression turned strange. "You know, there was a horse like that years ago. Belonged to your daddy. Disappeared in a storm, didn't he?" I swallowed. "Yes. His name was Solace." She looked past me toward the porch, where the horse stood quietly, watching. Her voice dropped. "Honey, that horse died. I remember. They found his tack washed up near the river weeks after the storm." I turned toward the horse, heart pounding. He blinked, calm, steady, as if the words didn't matter, And in that moment, standing in the cold autumn air, I realized something that made my skin prickle. Maybe Solace never left. Maybe he was waiting all this time. For me. They say when something impossible happens, your mind tries to rewrite it, makes it smaller, safer. That's what I told myself the next morning, standing in the doorway of my father's old barn, watching the chestnut horse graze quietly in the field as if he'd always belonged there. It had been 3 days since he first appeared outside my bedroom. 3 nights of rain, wind, and dreams that left me shaken. Dreams of running hooves, my father's voice whispering my name, and always the same image. The horse standing in the storm, waiting. I'd started calling him Solace again. The name fit too perfectly, like an old key sliding into a familiar lock. But every time I said it aloud, I could feel doubt creeping in. The logical part of me, the part that survived city life and boardroom meetings, insisted it was impossible. The real Solace had died 15 years ago. And yet when this horse looked at me, I felt seen. Not like a stranger, but like someone found after a long time apart. That morning, I went into town to buy feed. The clerk at the co-op gave me a funny look when I asked for grain without owning a horse. "You sure you don't mean dog food?" he teased. "No," I said. "Horse feed, just 1 bag." He grinned and hauled a sack onto the counter. "Lucky animal. You new around here. Moved back a few weeks ago." "Ah, back to the Hart place, huh?" He paused, leaning closer. "Heard about that storm the other night. You be careful up there. Strange things happen near those woods." I wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his tone made me stop. By the time I got home, the wind had picked up again, curling through the dry grass. Solace lifted his head from the trough as I approached, ears flicking toward me. "Hey, boy," I said softly. "You're not planning on running off again, are you?" He snorted, almost like a laugh. That afternoon, I tried to check if he had any brand or microchip, something that might prove he belonged to someone else. I called the local shelter again. The same man answered. "Ma'am, you say that horse came back?" "Yes, he won't leave my property." "And no, there's still no brand. Can someone come scan him?" "Sure thing," he said. "Tomorrow morning." I hung up and turned back to the field. Solace stood near the fence line, gazing toward the woods. His posture was strange, alert, tense, like he was watching something I couldn't see. "Do you see something out there?" I whispered. The woods behind the farmhouse had always unnerved me. They were dense, whispery, and darker than they should be, even in daylight. My father used to tell me not to wander there after sunset. "Things get lost in those trees," he'd say, half joking. Now I caught myself remembering his exact words, the way his voice had dropped when he said it. That night, the rain started again. I was reading by lamplight when I heard it, the same sound as before. Tap, tap. I looked toward the window. He was there again, standing in the downpour, head lifted toward the glass, eyes glimmering in the faint light. I hurried downstairs, grabbed my coat, and stepped outside. Solace. He didn't move. He just stood there, muscles quivering as thunder rolled in the distance. Then, without warning, he whinnied, a sharp, urgent sound that made the hairs on my arms rise. "What is it?" I asked. "What's wrong?" He turned suddenly, trotting toward the edge of the woods. For a heartbeat, I hesitated. Then I followed. The air smelled of wet leaves and earth. My flashlight cut through the darkness in thin slices. I called his name again and again, the sound swallowed by the storm. Finally, I found him standing near a fallen tree. His ears were pricked forward, eyes fixed on something half buried in the mud. I stepped closer, heart pounding. It was an old leather halter, half rotted, tangled in weeds. And on the strap, faint but visible, were the letters, S. Hart. My breath caught. My father's initials. I sank to my knees, rain dripping from my hair. "This can't be real," I whispered. Solace lowered his head beside me, touching the halter gently with his nose. The moment his breath hit the leather, I swear I felt warmth surge through me, like sunlight after weeks of gray. The same warmth I used to feel when my father lifted me onto Solace's back as a child. When I went back inside, I placed the halter on the kitchen table, My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I stayed awake until dawn, staring at it, trying to make sense of everything. Coincidence, I told myself. Maybe the halter had just washed up here after all these years. Maybe Solace, this Solace, just happened to find it. But deep down, I didn't believe that. Because that night, for the first time since my father died, I dreamed of him. He was standing in the barn doorway, smiling. Behind him, the chestnut horse waited quietly. And when he spoke, his voice was clear and calm. "Don't be afraid. Emmy, he knows the way home." I woke up crying. The next day, the animal control officer arrived. A woman this time, young, kind-eyed, holding a scanner. "That's a handsome one," she said, approaching Solace carefully. "He showed up out of nowhere," I explained. "I've been trying to find his owner." She scanned him, moved around, and frowned. "No chip. Odd. Most horses around here are tagged. Could he have wandered from another county?" "Maybe," she said, "but animals don't usually return to one spot over and over unless they've got a reason." She smiled politely, but I saw something uncertain in her eyes. As she drove off, I turned to Solace. "A reason, huh? What's yours?" He tossed his head, mane catching the sunlight, and for a moment, I thought I saw something shimmer along his coat, like faint light rippling beneath the surface. When I blinked, it was gone. Later that week, strange things began happening around the house. The porch light flickered every night at exactly 9:12 p.m., the same time my father's clock had stopped the night he passed. When I turned on the radio, it sometimes crackled with static that formed faint words, and once, just once, I swore I heard a man's laugh echo softly through the hallway, warm, familiar, and gone before I could turn around. Each time something happened, Solace was near, standing watch, calm and steady, and whenever I felt fear tightening my chest, he'd step closer, nudge me gently, and I'd feel at ease, like breathing after holding it too long. By the end of the second week, I'd stopped pretending I didn't believe in signs. Still, part of me wanted proof, something tangible. So I began searching through the attic, where my father's old things were stored. I found a box of journals, horse registries, and a faded photograph, me, maybe 10 years old, laughing as my father stood beside Solace, hand resting on the horse's neck. On the back of the photo, my father had written, "Solace, for Emily. May he always find his way back to you." My throat tightened. When I looked out the window again, Solace was standing in the field, staring straight at me. That evening, I sat outside on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, the old halter beside me. Solace grazed quietly under the moonlight. The night was cold but still, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine. "Why me?" I whispered. "Why now?" He lifted his head, as if he understood. For a moment, I thought about my father's last day. We'd argued that morning. I told him I was leaving for the city, that I didn't want to spend my life in the quiet shadow of Maple Hollow. He smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. "You can run as far as you want, Emmy," he'd said, "but the heart has a way of bringing you home." That was the last thing he ever said to me. And now, here was Solace, standing on the same soil, staring at me with those impossibly knowing eyes. Around midnight, I went inside and locked the door. I told myself to sleep, to stop letting imagination fill the spaces grief had carved, but then softly, so softly I almost missed it, I heard a sound, hoofbeats, not frantic or heavy, but rhythmic, calm, like a heartbeat outside the window. I pulled the curtain aside. Solace stood at the fence line, facing the woods again. His ears twitched toward the dark, nostrils flaring. "Do you want to go back?" I asked through the glass. He turned his head toward me and stamped the ground once. That single motion felt like an answer. The next morning, I walked to the wood's edge with him. Mist curled low around our feet, pale and ghostly. Halfway through the clearing, the air grew colder. My breath fogged the air, and then just for an instant I heard it again, a voice. My father's voice, faint but clear as wind through branches, Don't be afraid, Emmy. I turned sharply, heart pounding. Dad? No one. Only Solace beside me, steady and calm. But when I looked down, I saw it, carved faintly into the old fence post, letters etched long ago and half covered in moss. For Solace. For her. I stood there, trembling, realization spreading through me like warmth through cold. Maybe it wasn't about proof anymore. Maybe this wasn't about death or return, but about connection. Something that had waited, patiently, faithfully, until I was ready to see it again. As I ran my hand down Solace's neck, he leaned gently into my touch. And in that quiet, in the stillness of the woods, I finally whispered the words I hadn't said in years. I'm sorry I left. He exhaled softly, a low hum that felt like forgiveness. And for the first time since my father's death, I didn't feel alone. I used to think silence was peaceful. Now I know it can also be alive. Because ever since that morning in the woods, silence has followed me, breathing, listening, watching, as if the air itself remembered things I didn't. The days grew warmer after that, though the air still carried that strange electric tension, like a storm waiting behind the hills. Solace stayed close to the farmhouse, never wandering too far, but always keeping his eyes on the tree line. And I began to notice patterns, small things that shouldn't have meant anything, but somehow did. Every morning, at the same hour my father used to wake to feed the horses, Solace would neigh softly beneath my window. Every evening, just before sunset, he'd walk the perimeter of the yard in slow circles, as though guarding the place. He was more than just a horse now. He was presence, memory, echo. Sometimes I'd catch myself whispering to him about my day, the way I once spoke to my dad when he sat at the kitchen table polishing his boots. And though Solace couldn't speak, he responded, a tilt of his head, a nudge of his muzzle, a patient look that said, I hear you. One afternoon, I drove into town to ask around again. The local feed store owner, Mr. Callow, had been there since I was a kid. When I told him about the horse's arrival, his smile faltered. Chestnut, scar over the left eye? He asked. Yes. He hesitated, then crossed his arms. You know, I remember your daddy bringing a horse like that here once. Must have been 15, 16 years ago. That was Solace, I said softly. He disappeared in a storm. Right. The night the lightning hit the west ridge. Folks said the horse broke through the fence and ran straight into the woods. I know. We never found him. Mr. Callow's eyes grew thoughtful. You sure you're not just seeing what you want to see, Emily? Grief can do strange things. His words stung more than I expected. Maybe, I said. But he's real. He's here, he sighed. Well, if that's true, maybe he came back for a reason. A reason. Everyone kept saying that. When I returned home, the sun was low, painting the fields gold. Solace stood by the fence, watching the wind roll through the grass like waves. I walked to him, resting my hand on his warm neck. Do you have a reason? I murmured. He didn't move, but his gaze drifted toward the west, toward the same ridge where the lightning had struck all those years ago, the place where my father had died trying to save him. A shiver ran down my spine. That night, I dreamed again. I was standing in the field behind the barn. The air was thick with mist. My father's old lantern flickered in the distance, swaying gently. I walked toward it, barefoot in the damp grass. Then I heard it, the soft rhythm of hooves. Solace appeared through the fog, his coat glowing faintly, eyes reflecting the lantern light. He stopped beside me, and I could see something tied to his mane, a small silver key. When I reached for it, I heard a whisper. Not quite a voice, not quite a thought. The truth is where it ended. I woke up gasping, heart pounding, the dream fading like breath on glass. The next morning, I found Solace standing by the barn door. He had never gone inside before, but this time he nudged it gently with his nose. You want to go in? I asked. He nudged again. The barn smelled of dust and cedar and thyme. The roof creaked softly as sunlight filtered through the cracks. Old tools hung where my father had left them. As Solace stepped in, I noticed something odd. He stopped in front of a large wooden trunk I'd never seen before. It was pushed into the corner, half covered by a tarp. I brushed the dust away. A brass lock hung from it, dull with age, shaped like a horseshoe. And then I froze, because hanging from Solace's mane, tangled in a bit of straw, was a small, silver key, the same one from my dream. My hands trembled as I knelt down and slid the key into the lock. It turned easily, as if it had been waiting all these years. Inside were my father's things: ledgers, photographs, a leather-bound journal. The first page was dated 2 weeks before the storm that took him. September 12th. Solace acting strange lately. Keeps standing at Emily's window after dark, like he's guarding her. Maybe he senses something I don't. I flipped the page, my heart in my throat. September 17th. Heard a whisper last night. Sounded like her mother's voice. Don't know what to make of it. Solace wouldn't settle until I went outside. Found the old halter by the fence again. How did it get there? And then, the last entry, October 1st. Storm coming. Solace restless. Keeps pawing at the gate, looking toward the ridge. I think he's trying to tell me something. If I don't come back, tell Emmy I'm sorry. Tell her Solace knew before I did. My breath hitched. I clutched the journal to my chest and turned to Solace. What does it mean? I whispered. What did he know? The horse watched me silently, eyes deep and steady. And then, as if answering, a gust of wind swept through the barn, knocking over an old lantern. It didn't shatter, but it rolled toward the door, stopping perfectly at my feet, the same kind from my dream. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the ridge, the place where it ended. I stood at the window, staring at the dark line of trees. My heart pounded with the pull of something I couldn't name: fear, curiosity, longing. Maybe all three. Solace stood by the fence, motionless, his gaze fixed in the same direction. Do you want me to go there? I whispered. He lifted his head slightly. The wind howled in reply. The next morning, I packed a flashlight, a thermos, and my father's journal. The ridge was less than a mile away, but it felt like crossing into another world. Solace followed close behind, his hooves sinking softly into the wet earth. The air smelled of pine and rain, though no clouds marked the sky. The higher I climbed, the quieter it became, until the only sounds were my heartbeat and Solace's breath. Finally, we reached it, the spot where lightning had struck years ago. The trees were still blackened in places, their bark split and charred. I knelt beside one, brushing away moss, and saw something glint beneath the soil. It was a rusted metal tag, half buried. Property of Hart Farm. My father's handwriting was scratched faintly into the back. If found, return to Emily. I swallowed hard. He knew, I whispered. He knew something was going to happen. Solace lowered his head beside me. Then I heard it, faint but clear. A whisper, threading through the trees. You're not alone, Emmy. My breath caught. I turned, eyes wide. Dad? Nothing, only the wind stirring leaves. But Solace took a single step forward, ears pricked, and stared deeper into the woods. Following his gaze, I saw a faint shimmer, a patch of light moving between the trees, like fog catching fire. I followed, barely breathing. The light led to a small clearing I'd never seen before. In the center stood a wooden post, weathered and leaning. On it hung a tarnished horseshoe. The horseshoe, the same one that had been missing from our barn after the storm, and carved into the post were 3 words. He found her. Tears blurred my vision. I reached out, touching the carving with trembling fingers. Found me, I whispered. What does that mean? But even as I spoke, I felt it. The same warmth as before, wrapping around me like sunlight through fog. Solace pressed his nose to my shoulder. The air shimmered faintly, and for just one heartbeat I saw him, my father, standing on the other side of the clearing. He didn't speak. He just smiled, eyes filled with peace, and nodded once before fading like mist. I sank to my knees, sobbing quietly. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry I left. The wind moved gently through the grass. Solace bent his head, breathing softly beside me. And somehow, I knew my father had forgiven me long ago. When we returned to the farmhouse, the world felt different, lighter. The silence no longer heavy, only calm. That evening, I sat on the porch with Solace grazing nearby. I opened my father's journal again, flipping to the last blank page, and began to write. He's gone, but not lost. Some bonds don't end. They wait. I looked up at Solace, his coat glowing in the fading light. Did you know, boy? I asked softly. Did you know he was still here? He turned his head, eyes warm, steady, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw my father's reflection there. That night, I dreamed again. But this time, it wasn't a storm. I was standing in an open field of tall grass, sunlight pouring over everything. My father was there, smiling, and beside him, Solace ran freely, mane shining, hooves flashing like gold. When I called his name, he turned, and I realized something. The sadness in his eyes was gone. He wasn't waiting anymore. He was free. I woke with tears on my face. The morning light soft through the curtains. Outside, Solace stood by the fence, head high, watching the sunrise, and I knew. The whisper in the fields wasn't a warning. It was a promise that love never really leaves. It just finds a new way to stay. For 2 weeks, things had been calm, almost peaceful. After finding the clearing, the horseshoe, and my father's journal, I'd started to sleep again. Solace still lingered near the house, always watchful, always close. I fed him every morning and brushed his coat until it gleamed like burnished copper. The bond between us felt different now, less like coincidence, more like purpose, like we were waiting for something neither of us could name. And then, one afternoon, the wind changed. It started with the smell. That sharp, metallic scent that rolls in just before a storm breaks. I was on the porch reading when Solace suddenly lifted his head, ears snapping forward. His muscles tensed, nostrils flaring. "What is it?" I asked, setting my book aside. He pawed at the ground, restless. His gaze turned toward the ridge again, the same place where everything had started and everything had ended. Clouds were gathering fast, black and rolling, swallowing the sunlight in a single breath. A distant rumble cracked through the valley, and then, somewhere deep inside me, something remembered that sound. By nightfall, the storm had arrived. Wind howled against the farmhouse walls. The trees bent low, thrashing like they wanted to tear free from the ground. Rain lashed against the windows in silver sheets. I closed the shutters, trying not to think about that night 15 years ago, the night I'd last seen my father alive. The air smelled the same. The thunder struck in the same rhythm, and somewhere outside, through the chaos, I heard it, the echo of a neigh. "Solace," I whispered. I ran to the window. Through the rain, I saw him near the fence, pacing wildly. Lightning illuminated him for a split second, a flash of copper against the storm, his mane whipping like fire. He was terrified. But not for himself. He was looking toward the woods. I threw on my raincoat and boots, ignoring the voice in my head telling me this was madness. I grabbed the flashlight and ran out into the night. The rain was blinding, needles against my face. "Solace," I shouted. "Come back!" He turned once, eyes meeting mine, wide, urgent, and then bolted through the open gate toward the trees. I didn't hesitate. I followed. The woods were darker than I remembered. The beam of my flashlight flickered in the sheets of rain. Every sound felt amplified, branches snapping, thunder rolling like the ground itself was splitting open. "Solace," I cried again, voice swallowed by the storm. I caught glimpses of him through the trees, a blur of chestnut, flashes of movement between lightning strikes. He was heading uphill, toward the ridge, the same ridge, my father's ridge, the one I swore I'd never climb again. Halfway up, the ground gave way beneath my boots. I stumbled, sliding down through the mud before catching myself on a root. My flashlight flew from my hand and landed a few feet away, the beam spinning across the darkness. I grabbed it and pushed forward, my lungs burning. Every step felt heavier, the storm pressing against me like a living thing. Then I saw him. Solace stood on the ridge, his body outlined against the sky, wild and magnificent. Lightning flashed, turning the world white for a heartbeat. Solace. He turned his head toward me and let out a sound that was almost human in its anguish. And then I saw it. The tree. The same charred trunk my father had been found beside all those years ago. The storm reached its peak. Wind tore through the clearing, rain pounding hard enough to sting. Solace stomped the ground, eyes fixed on the base of that tree. I stumbled toward him, shining the flashlight where he looked, and froze. Something glinted through the mud, a metal box. Small, rusted, nearly buried beneath roots, my heart raced. I knelt, fingers trembling, and began to dig. When I finally pulled it free, lightning struck so close the ground shook beneath me. Solace reared up, neighing loudly, but didn't run. He stood between me and the storm, shielding me, just as he had that night. I fumbled the box open. Inside was a folded piece of paper, protected by plastic. My father's handwriting. "If you ever find this, Emmy, then you've come back when you were ready. Solace isn't lost. He's the bridge. Follow him, and you'll know what love refuses to leave behind." My throat tightened. Tears mixed with the rain. "I'm here, Dad," I whispered. "I'm here." The wind howled louder, swirling around us. For a split second, it almost sounded like laughter, warm and familiar. And then lightning struck again. This time, closer. I don't remember falling. I remember the flash, the deafening crack, and then the ground vanished. When I opened my eyes, everything was white. The rain, the trees, the mud, all gone. I was standing in the same field I'd dreamed of before. Sunlight everywhere, the air warm and sweet. Solace was there, calm and still, his coat gleaming like gold. And beside him stood my father. He looked exactly as I remembered. Tall, strong, wearing that same flannel shirt and gentle smile. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. "Dad," he nodded. "You found it." Tears blurred my vision. "The letter. The box." He stepped closer, resting a hand on Solace's neck. "He brought you back." "I knew he would." I shook my head. "I don't understand. How is this possible?" His expression softened. "Love isn't bound by time, Emmy. Sometimes it just waits until you're ready to listen." Solace snorted softly, pressing his head against my shoulder. The warmth of him felt real, too real. "Is he—" I swallowed hard. "Is he yours or mine?" My father smiled faintly. "He's both. He carried my heart when I couldn't anymore, and now he's carrying yours." A soft glow spread through the air, golden light, wrapping around us like morning sun. My father reached out and touched my cheek. "It's time to stop running, sweetheart. You can let the pain go now." I shook my head. "If I let go, I'll lose you." "No," he said. "You'll find me in different ways. In every dawn, every heartbeat, every time that horse looks at you." The words sank deep, like roots into soil, and then the light began to fade. "Wait," I whispered. "Don't go." He smiled again, that same warm, unhurried smile. I never did. The light dissolved, and suddenly, the storm roared back. I woke to the taste of rain, cold, wet, real. My flashlight was beside me, still flickering. The box was clutched in my hand, the letter inside unharmed. Solace stood over me, drenched but steady, his breath hot in the night air. He nudged me gently, urging me up. "Good boy," I gasped. "You found me." He whinnied softly, lowering his head until his forehead touched mine, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, I felt the warmth of my father's hand over mine again. By morning, the storm had passed. The sky was washed clean, pale blue stretching endlessly above the ridge. I walked home slowly, Solace following close behind. Every step felt new, grounded, lighter somehow. The farmhouse stood unharmed, sunlight spilling across its windows. Inside, everything looked the same, but it felt different. Alive, I spent the rest of the day cleaning the barn, humming under my breath. A tune I hadn't realized I remembered until Solace perked his ears. My father's favorite song. When I reached for the old halter hanging on the wall, I noticed something strange. The brass nameplate, once tarnished and dull, shone bright again, as if it had been freshly polished. "Thank you," I whispered. Solace flicked his tail and turned toward the open field, eyes bright and calm. That evening, I stood on the porch as the sun sank behind the hills. The air was quiet, soft, still humming faintly with what had been, with what remained. Solace grazed a few yards away, his coat glowing in the last light. And though I didn't hear words, I felt it, a voice not in sound but in certainty. "I'm proud of you, Emmy." I smiled through the tears. The storm had come full circle, not to destroy, but to return what was lost. And for the first time since my father's death, I didn't feel haunted. I felt home. Later, before going inside, I whispered one last thing into the wind. "Wherever you are, thank you for sending him back." Solace lifted his head, looking toward the horizon. The clouds had cleared completely. A single streak of light lingered, gold against violet sky, and as the wind shifted, the chime by my window rang softly. Though there was no breeze, it sounded almost like laughter. The days after the storm were calm, almost surreal. Maple Hollow seemed to hold its breath, the air soft and fragrant, carrying the faint scent of wet pine and earth. Solace stayed near the farmhouse, grazing quietly in the morning light, his coat still shimmering like copper in the sun. But something had shifted in him, in us. The storm had been a bridge. Between the past and the present, between my father and me, between fear and trust, I felt stronger, steadier. Yet, despite everything, I couldn't shake the sense that this chapter of our story was nearing its end. A week after the storm, I woke to the sound of soft tapping at my window. My heart jumped. Could it be him? I opened the curtains. Solace stood there, hoof pressed lightly against the porch step, looking up at me with those impossibly intelligent eyes. "You came back," I whispered. "Of course you did." He didn't move, just tilted his head, ears flicking. A faint glimmer in the morning sun made his coat look like liquid gold. It was the kind of sight that steals your breath, the kind that makes the world outside stop. I grabbed a halter and stepped onto the porch. "Ready for breakfast?" I asked softly. And as I walked him toward the barn, I noticed it, a faint trail of hoofprints leading toward the woods. Something in me stiffened. A whisper of anticipation. A warning? Or a promise? For the first time I decided to follow. Solace didn't resist. He moved steadily, deliberately, his hooves sinking into the damp earth. The woods were quiet, save for birds beginning their morning songs and the faint rustle of leaves. We reached the clearing again, the one where I had first found the tarnished horseshoe, where the metal box and my father's last message had waited for me. But today, it was empty. No glow, no shimmer, no signs of the strange warmth I had felt before. Just the wind, brushing softly against my cheeks. Solace stopped at the center, lowered his head and stamped once, and then I noticed it. A small, silver horseshoe resting against a tree trunk, not tarnished, not old, perfect, polished. I knelt and picked it up. My fingers traced the smooth curve, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Somewhere deep in the woods, a soft sound echoed. A whinny. Not Solace's. Something lighter, distant, almost ghostly. I froze. "Who's there?" I whispered. The wind answered, carrying nothing but leaves and distant light. Solace nudged my shoulder, and I realized he was guiding me. For the next few days, a strange routine settled over us. Solace would follow me to the edge of the woods, stand silently, and then return to the barn. I noticed subtle things, the way he would paw the ground, lower his head, or snort softly whenever I felt uneasy. It was as if he had become more than a companion, a guardian, a teacher, a reminder that some bonds never truly end. And still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was waiting. Something final. One evening, a week later, the feeling became impossible to ignore. The sky was streaked with pink and gold as the sun sank behind the hills. Solace stood at the fence line, tense, ears forward, nostrils flaring. "Not again," I whispered. "Please, not another storm." But it wasn't a storm. It was the quiet before something monumental. He whinnied once, sharp, clear, and bolted toward the field, galloping as if carrying the wind itself. I ran after him, breath shallow, heart pounding, lightning streaked across the horizon. Not the violent kind from before, but faint, dancing streaks illuminating the distant trees. And then I saw him, a figure standing at the far edge of the field. My father. I stopped dead, frozen. For a moment, the world held its breath. The figure stepped forward. The light caught him perfectly. He smiled, warm, familiar, exactly as I remembered. "Dad?" My voice cracked. He nodded slowly. "I've been waiting for you, Emmy." Solace slowed, lowering his head. The horse's eyes met mine, steady, calm. I realized something in that instant. He was leaving, and I had to let him go. My father's figure didn't speak again, only extended a hand. I took a step forward. The wind wrapped around me, carrying the scent of the storm, the field, the trees, and something eternal. And then, with a soft rush of air, he vanished, not suddenly. Not harshly, but gently, like a memory fading into the morning light. I sank to my knees, clutching Solace's mane. "It's okay," I whispered. "You're still here. You're still here." He nudged me softly, his breath warm against my cheek. And for the first time I understood. Some endings aren't about loss, they're about transformation. The next morning, Solace was waiting as usual, but something had changed. He didn't follow me to the woods. He stayed closer to the barn, calm, patient, almost regal in his quiet presence. Weeks passed. I fed him, groomed him, brushed his coat until it shone like sunlight on copper. I began volunteering at the nearby horse sanctuary, sharing my knowledge with others, connecting with the animals that had always brought me peace. And each night, when I returned to the farmhouse, I would find him waiting always. Then one morning, I found a single horseshoe outside my bedroom window. Polished, silver glinting in the sun. I knelt and picked it up, breath-catching. A soft breeze stirred the curtains. I felt it. The same warmth I had felt when my father had spoken through the storm. Through dreams, through solace, I whispered, "Thank you." The wind shifted, and for a moment, it felt like something, or someone, had passed by. I opened the window, feeling the cool morning air against my face, and I knew. Solace had returned to me. Not just as a horse, but as a guardian, a friend, a connection to something larger than grief or fear. He waited. Always. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky gold and violet, I sat on the porch. Solace grazed nearby, the soft rustle of his movements the only sound in the quiet world. I traced my fingers over the silver horseshoe, holding it close to my heart, and I realized something profound. Some bonds never leave. They wait. They guide. They carry the weight of love across time, storms, and even death. Solace lifted his head, ears flicking, as if sensing my thoughts. I smiled through tears. "You're still here, aren't you, boy?" He whinnied softly. "Yes," I whispered. "You never left." The sun set completely, leaving the sky a deep violet. I watched Solace standing in the fading light, mane and tail catching the last rays like liquid fire, and in that moment, I knew the truth. Love, patience, and loyalty are timeless. Some spirits never leave, they just find a new way to stay. As night fell, I closed my eyes for the first time in months, feeling safe. Outside, Solace waited. steadfast, patient, eternal. And I finally understood that endings can also be beginnings. The story wasn't over. It was just taking a new path, guided by a horse who had waited outside my bedroom, refusing to leave. The end.